like people, horses have off days, and by looking at them before they actually get on the racetrack, you get an initial impression of which way they're leaning.
This is going to sound crazy, but for me, it's intellectual stimulation.
Class is now in session. It's time for night school. Here are your hosts.
And welcome in, everyone, to the second episode on the 2018 season of Night School, the National Online Fan Education Player Development Program. I'm Jeremy Plonk from Horse Player Now, joined on our nights at the round table by an esteemed cast again tonight. We're going to talk about a lot of topics. They're situational to what we see in racing right now in the month of April, and things that you can apply not only this week, next week, but down the road as well. Joining us in Night School tonight, Caton Bredar, the First Lady of Night School. Caton, welcome in.
Hey, I'm happy to be here. And boy, time's rolling by. It's almost Derby time. Can't believe it. Perfect timing for us to get together and chat.
And Bob Neumeier back with us for an episode tonight. Neumie, keeping warm in New England.
Yeah, trying in balmy some days, New England, but not today. I'll tell you that. And not that I feel badly for baseball players because they make $1 million, I guess. But you see them and they've got their ski masks on. And how do you hit a baseball when you're that cold? But I'll tell you one thing: you can bet at right now, and I'm maybe not today, but certainly Wednesday or Thursday. I don't care what the temperature is. That's the beauty of horse racing, is that temperatures do not matter.
We will talk weather a little bit later and the impact of bad weather on your handicapping, one of our many topics tonight on the roundtable, which is rounded out this evening by Brian W. Spencer, General Manager of Horse Player Now. Spence, welcome in.
Hey, thanks, JP. And this is always that really cool time of year because not only are we looking forward to Derby, we've got most of the preps out of the way, but we're right in the throes of the Keeneland meet. So a really fun time on the racing calendar pretty much every time we get around to April. And I'm looking forward to trying to get some ideas out of the panel here tonight just about how to attack those kinds of races and those kinds of meets.
We've solicited some of your opinions around the country over the last month. Be sure to participate. Send us a message on Facebook, DM us on Twitter, send an email to Brian W. Spencer at horseplayernow.com to give your suggestions for future topics. We're the second Tuesday of every month throughout the course of the year, and we take your topics and put them to use here in the roundtable along with some of our own opinions. We're going to hit a lot of different topics tonight. Big day handicapping approaches, handicapping books, what to do in bad weather, short-term and long-term trends. How do you jump in and out, especially with some short racing meets? And those short racing meets like we see at Keeneland, at Saratoga, at Del Mar later in the year, how do you adjust for trainer intent on those short meets and also horses moving different circuit to circuit? This is the time of year in April where horses are moving from different parts of the country to other areas. They're coming north, fairgrounds, Oaklawn. These kind of meets have wound down or are winding down. Gulfstream kind of changes its situation now. Neumeier gets much better, obviously, this quarter than it was over the past quarter during the course of the winter. How do you adjust as horses move circuit to circuit? Those are some of the topics we'll talk about tonight amongst our roundtable, and we'll also get into a few extra guests coming along a little bit later in the show, so stick around for that. We're with you for the next 60 minutes on Night School. Feel free to take part in the live chat if you are listening to our live premiere, Tuesday, 8:30 Eastern, the second Tuesday of each month. You can also take part in the live chat going on right now. Just click on the show title on your Spreaker console. That will take you into the live chat. You can log in using a Spreaker ID. It's free and easy to set up, or use your existing Facebook and Twitter accounts to take part in the live chat. The Dean, Jerry Schottenkirk, moderating the live chat as he has all 8 seasons of Night School. All right, panelists, let's get into our first topic, and I really want to talk about that short-term, long-term, short meet statistical approach. We saw it this weekend at Keeneland, this past weekend. It was the opening 3 days of the 2018 spring meet. And Caton, I know this is something that you wanted to talk about because there were some things kind of developing that may send the horse player one direction, but the ship can right pretty quickly in a meet like this. And how do we adjust for kind of short and long-term trends? Take it away, Caton.
Well, exactly, because when you enter a meet, particularly a shorter kind of boutique-style meet like Keeneland, you go in armed with some historical data or some things that you've seen in the past. But you kind of have to have an open mind, too, because things can change depending on different race circuits, different competitors and participants in those race meets coming into Keeneland. So traditionally, say, places like Gulfstream Park have yielded a lot of winners there. But I had a feeling going into it that the fairgrounds horses might be better maybe than in years past. Adapting to that or kind of keeping yourself open to that possibility is really important. But then after the first day, you sometimes have to reassess. Now, fortunately, in terms of how fairgrounds competition fared, there was no reassessing. They dominated on opening day. So you take that with you and you continue to apply it in the situations that are comparable. Friday's card was a very different card than Saturday's card. So you see how the fairgrounds shippers held up and maybe how Gulfstream or other circuits did as well. But maybe you don't go quite as heavily on a Saturday as you do on, say, a Sunday, where, once again, we kind of have similar styled races. But another way that you could look at it is in individual participants. For example, Wesley Ward has always dominated with 2-year-olds. He's done incredibly well, particularly at Keeneland. So not a big surprise that on opening day, his 2-year-olds were extremely short-priced favorites. He went 0 for 2 with the first 2 that he ran, who were less than odds-on favorites, and that could make you a little leery going forward. But particularly on Sunday, a great example, in the first race, there were some scratches, there were some, or it might have been the third race. He had a few more entered again. I think it would have been tempting to jump off the Wesley Ward bandwagon. The most important thing you can do is see if horses aren't winning, how they're losing. Are they losing because they weren't well spotted, they were not quite fit enough, or maybe were there extenuating circumstances? Maybe they didn't get out of the gate. Maybe the track was off. Maybe they just hooked a particularly good horse that people didn't expect. Circumstances were different by the time we got to Sunday for a few of those short-priced Wesley Ward horses, and the time to jump on board again and use them, at least in exotic wagers, was definitely on Sunday, because where he faltered on opening day, he showed up on Sunday. If you also looked at the balance of Wesley's runners, all his horses were getting bet down, but outside of the 2-year-olds, he won the stakes race right off the bat. He won, and all his horses were running extremely well and competitively. So if you had just gone off the results of those 2-year-old races and kind of stopped using him, it would have been a mistake. You have to keep an open mind, and you have to adapt to the individual race situation, as well as analyze what contributed to the losses. And I really thought that was important and it will be important going forward, because he's going to continue to get bet, as he always does. The betting public's a little slow sometimes to either jump on a bandwagon, which we saw with the fairgrounds horses, still yielding really good prices on Sunday, despite their dominance on opening day. And the same is going to be true with Wesley. His horses are going to continue to be bet down. If I think it's a tough race where there are others that have a shot, I'm probably going to take a position of maybe not going so heavily on a Wesley Ward young horse or layoff horse. But if it looks like there really isn't anything else that can run with them, I'm going to use them.
Noemi, what about
Jeremy? Is this a 6-hour show, or is this a long show, or it seems that way?
It's the internet. We have all night, Noemi. We don't close.
Oh, I see. I see. I want to respond to Caton's monologue about Wesley Ward and Keeneland and fairgrounds and all of that stuff. Because look, every race is a race unto itself. Okay, it's random whether some years fairgrounds horses thrive or they don't thrive. Now, when it comes to Wesley Ward and his 2-year-olds, why would anybody in their right mind want to get up there at 2 to 5 in an exotic or whatever and simply guess in a 2-year-old race when there's no form whatsoever? I don't care about breeding. I don't care about stats. I don't care about anything. It's lunchtime for me. Have a beer. Enjoy yourself in that particular situation. So, racing is 9 races. It's 10 races. Man, if you got to jump into all of them, good luck to you. Me, I'm lucky if I can make 1 or 2 plays a day to survive. But look, again, randomness to me is very much part of this equation. And although I think that stats are somewhat of a guide to this whole enterprise, I don't think they're a must. I don't think they're necessary, but I think they're interesting to look at. And again, race by race, is the way to go.
Well, Neumeier just put me out of business because stats are not relevant. So I turn in my resignation to the racing industry.
No, Jeremy, they're a guide. Okay, I'm a much of a stat guy as the next guy. Okay, yeah. I believe in past analytics, in data. I mean, people have made fortunes understanding data and analytics. But again, it's not exactly the keys to the city.
Right.
You can give me a stat about Todd Pletcher. Or Wesley, let's take Wesley Ward since Caton talked about it. And he's 2-5, and he's got a 28% win strike rate with first-time 2-year-olds at Keeneland. Okay, great. He's friggin' 2-5. You can't bet it.
Right.
I don't care what his stats are.
You can't avoid it. And that's the thing is these races are usually at the front of the card, so they're going to catch in a pick 4, pick 5. Sometimes you handicap these races because they're part of a sequence, and you kind of almost get forced into it. I agree, intra-race. I think they're really not good betting races whatsoever to be jumping into, but as part of a multi-race sequence, sometimes you get pulled in or out. One quick point about analyzing numbers and stats. One thing I think is really important as a stats geek and a guy who puts a lot of these numbers out, keep in mind the good numbers are the ones you want to follow. The bad numbers are the ones you don't want to sway. The negative stats. If I tell you somebody's 1 for 10, does that sound like a negative stat? 0 for 20, that's negative stat. But remember, everybody loses 80% of the time plus in horse racing. So negative stats take hardly anything to turn around. You can get back to being a 10 or 20% winner by winning 1 out of 10. That raises you 10%. Don't get caught up in negative stats. But if you see a positive stat, a guy has done this 3 out of 4 times when making this kind of move. I think positive stats are things you want to kind of clench onto. Negative stats shouldn't influence you too much as a horse player. Spence, let's get you jumping in on this.
Well, I think that I think, Jeremy, you just touched on one of those things is, I'm not very interested using this Wesley Ward at Keeneland with his first-time starters example. I'm not interested in playing those races straight up, because you're just guessing at that point whether the horse who's 2-5 is live or not. But if you get stuck in those multi-race wagers where you like another horse in the sequence and you're really looking to maximize that, then you have to make that decision. Am I 100% against Wesley's 2-5 first-time starter, or am I willing to include him? Growing up at Arlington Park, it was the Frank Calabrese, Wayne Catalano thing. Do you use the horse at 1-5 and be willing to get beat, or do you just kind of suck it up and hope to get through a leg? But I think one of the things Caton said too is very important, because especially in those kinds of races, those statistical guides I think are useful, perhaps more so than Neumeier thinks. But how are these horses losing? You can have a guy, I think of Ron Fauché at Fairgrounds a couple times. He's 0 for 30, but he's run second 8 times. Wesley Ward's horses, I think some of those firsters that lost, and this is not just specific to the 2018 spring meet, but generally they were running well. They weren't hitting a brick wall at the top of the stretch. They were just getting beat by one horse, just getting tired late. You take that one horse out and he's got a couple of 6-length winners in races like that. So I think, when you look at that, immediately it might say, let's jump off. Maybe this is not going to be the same kind of meet. But as we saw, as is always going to be the case, I think if they're running well, those stats are going to turn around, and you just kind of have to stick with your gut, stick with what you know about horses like that, even if it means, vertically speaking, passing the race while then having to make that decision, which your guess is as good as mine on how to play those multi-race wagers when you've got those 2-5s that you have no idea what they're going to do.
And Jeremy, and guys, I just want to add, Neumeier's going to get fat if he goes to lunch every time Wesley Ward has a 3-5 first-time starter.
All right. I already am, Caton, so what difference does another French fry make to me right now? I'm trying to enjoy myself here.
But before the meet is over, they're going to be about a third of the races, and that is why it is important.
That's okay. That's okay. How many races? Caton, you know how many races there are a day that you can bet? There's 10 a day per track, times what, 15 tracks?
Right.
So you get about 150 choices. So my attitude, Caton, is that if I make 4 or 5 plays a day, that's a lot for me. A day, not a track. So patience. That's my virtue. Patience.
Let's pick up on that patience angle and keep with some of these shorter type layoff situations we see at these shorter type boutique meets. And Spence, I know this is a topic that came to you and you wanted to bring up of what to do with layoff horses and horses that are just aimed at some of these short exclusive meets and how to evaluate trainer intent. For instance, we'll use the Keeneland example because it's at the, on the tip of our tongue. 7 horses in the 30 races opening weekend won that were making their first start of 2018. 7 out of 30 races were won by horses who had not started at all this year, and we're talking the first week of April. So, Brian, why don't you get us rolling in here and the discussion on layoff horses in these big boutique meets?
Yeah, not only the layoff horses, but also horses who are dropping in class in a position where maybe I would otherwise find it a little bit suspect. I think that that's one of the things to remember when you've got these meets, especially early on in the season when you're trying to get a gauge on horses who maybe are making their first start at a Keeneland or first start at a Saratoga is, people want to win races at these kinds of places. And I think when you look at some of the ownership coupled with the trainers of some of these horses, normally at another track, maybe, a 62.5 claim who 2 races later is being dropped in for 40 or 25 in decent form at another track. That's a big red flag to me. At a place like Keeneland, it complicates things a little bit because that people want to get their picture taken there. So is that drop sort of a typical panicky red flag kind of drop, or is it the kind of drop where people just want to win a race? And I think that at least for me, for years has been kind of a vexing thing as far as my handicapping goes. And the one thing that I do think, and that stat for opening weekend at Keeneland is very useful, is that I tend to expect that horses will be ready. A guy who's got 8% winners off of the layoff becomes a little bit more intriguing to me when they're making that first start at a place like Keeneland, because you've got to assume that the horses are cranked, because where else are you pointing to at that point if you're trying to break your maiden? You'd rather do it at Keeneland than anywhere else.
And Caton, your observations on that, following these meets so closely?
I think a good example is someone like a Chad Brown going into Keeneland. Now, to be fair, Chad dominates usually everywhere he's at. But in particular, in watching his horses running at Gulfstream, he kind of changed a little bit of his modus operandi, and you didn't see them running quite as much as you had in years past. And when they did, they didn't always win. But there was a layoff usually involved with horses there, as opposed to the Keeneland meet, where every horse he's sent out, for the most part, has been extremely live. If you looked at the workout patterns, you could kind of get a sense of that going into it. They were, for the most part, sharper works, a little bit more intensity involved. But in general, I think that intention that Brian kind of spoke to also was coming through. I believe that where Gulfstream was a chance to kind of rest up, lay up, and prepare, Chad used Keeneland as a meet to shoot for, to have those horses ready to run and fire big right away. And you can do that, with a lot of trainers, even a smaller trainer. Vicky Oliver is a great example. Almost every year, Vicky Oliver, who has a very small number of horses relative to a Chad Brown or a Todd Pletcher, comes in with horses that are usually pretty good prices, but that are ready to run. And you can kind of pick up on it on the workout patterns, but also historically, if you look at it, and in general, if you look at the individual horses, they may be coming off layoffs, but you kind of have a sense that they have been pointed for these spots.
And Neumeier.
Well, I think there's a kind of a gift and a curse going on here at a place like Keeneland, because I think the gift is big fields. The gift is horses coming from everywhere on the planet. And so you're going to have a kind of a Breeders' Cup type odds board where there's a lot of horses that you think have a good chance to win at a pretty decent price. That's the gift. The curse is that I mean, who can figure it out? I mean, I think it's very, very difficult. And that's what makes racing so damn perplexing, is that, you know, there's all these kind of questions that have to be answered by yourself, by a player. And Keeneland, to me, well, I think Spence is right and Caton is right that trainers do point for that meet. Well, that's great. I mean, great. They point for the meet, you know, but I mean, I don't need to be a genius to figure out Chad Brown's going to win X amount of races. Of course he is. Todd Pletcher's going to win a lot of races. Of course they are. So I think that if you can kind of concentrate on, again, to be patient 2 or 3 races a day and try to get some kind of play that has some kind of value to you. Now, if you hit it, great. You know, the way I play, if I hit, you know, 1 out of 10, the chances are I'm going to come out even, or maybe even a little bit above even. But, you know, so, I mean, Keeneland is very selective. And so that's why I say these boutique meets are a blessing and a curse, because, yeah, you love them. Yeah, you look forward to them. Yeah, Saratoga's great. All that good stuff. But sort of the trainers, they point to those meetings, and we know who's going to win and who has a tremendous percentage there. We know that. So factor that in going in, you know, and understand that, you know, maybe you're not going to get a great price on a Todd Pletcher or a Chad Brown or whatever. So either go for it, or, to quote Caton, have another fry for me.
You know, the layoff horses aren't what they used to be in horse racing. You know, it used to be, if you look at the old handicapping books, you know, 30 days, draw a line through a horse if they haven't run in 30 days. Of course, we know that to be blasphemous nowadays, and you'll take a huge bath throwing out every horse that's been away 30 days or more. The out-of-competition supplements, steroids, and things like that can be used out of competition that aren't allowed to be in a horse's system around race day are things that I think that make that 3, 4, 5 month layoff not what it used to be. And in some cases with some horses, it might even be advantageous for them to be further out of their form cycle, to have trained, to use all the supplements, to use everything that's legal out of competition. And then by the time race time comes along, they've built up the muscle mass. They've gotten a lot of great training, a lot of tandem drills by these major barns that we see. You watch the XBTV videos, and all of these big barns, you see how they work their horses in tandem. It's a great advantage for a Pletcher, a Baffert, a Chad Brown, that they can work these horses in company with other top-notch horses that can actually warm them up in the morning and simulate racing. So there are some advantages to kind of being out of competition now compared to the way it used to be in yesteryear. So these horses that are aimed for these spots 3-4 months out and take their time to come back to them, it's not the same evaluation that we used to think. And these horses, again, I think can almost come back in some advantage into some of these spots depending on where they're placed. So that talks a little bit about the trainer intent and the moving of meets from one place to another. As these guys all talked about, you know, if Chad hasn't gone all out at Gulfstream and aims for something and his stable starts unwinding them when they come north, then you want to look at that. Pletcher's barn typically empties out at Gulfstream, and he has unbelievable statistics the first couple months of the year, and then he's absolutely effective the rest of the year, but not as potent. They run out of conditions. They win the maiden races. They win the first and second level allowance races. Then things start to get tougher, and the spots are harder to find. So if you want to look at a barn going from meet A to meet B, and which ones are going to transfer their form the best, look for the ones who have horses that have conditions left. You know, Kenny McPeak said years ago on Night School, if you want to win a meet title, you need to have conditions eligible for your horses. You have to have a lot of maidens in your barn ready to break maidens. You have to have a lot of first-level conditions, because those are the most common races you see during the course of a meet. If you're going to run off 10, 15, 20 wins at a meet, you have to have horses eligible for those lower conditions, because those are the races that are most prevalent in the book. So if you want to find out from this meet to the next which barns are going to be successful, watch the early races of a meet that are in the maiden and like the first level, non-winners of one other non-winners of one other than that N1X allowance condition, non-winners of 2. Who's winning those kind of races? Who has horses entered in those type races? And those are the ones you might see turn up the heat and have a really good meet. We're going to take a break here on Night School. When we come back, plenty more topics on the roundtable. Stay with us.
And we'll be right back with more Night School.
Racing fans, it's almost time for the Kentucky Derby, and ExpressBet is your prep races headquarters. Watch the top contending thoroughbreds race their way to the Triple Crown. And now you can take advantage of our 0% takeout and money-back guarantee promotions. You heard that right, 0% takeout and I'll win bet money-back guarantee for all 16 races on the road to the Kentucky Derby, including the big ones you won't want to miss, like the ExpressBet Fountain of Youth, Florida Derby, and Santa Anita Derby. At ExpressBet, it's your way to play, and we give you all the tools you'll need, like seamless online mobile wagering, live HD video, wager guides for the big prep races, and more. You'll be betting like an expert in no time. And if you're not already an ExpressBet customer, we've got you covered too. Sign up now and pick your $500, $100, or $20 bonus. Ready to play? The first Saturday in May is coming quick, so visit expressbet.com to get started. Must be 18 years or older and 21 years old in certain states to open an account with ExpressBet and reside in a state where such activity is legal, void where prohibited. National Gambling Support Line 800-522-4700.
Sir Dudley Diggs the threat. Mies Gizmo in front, but here comes Sir Dudley Diggs and Julien Leparoux. Sir Dudley Diggs has hit the front, and Sir Dudley Diggs from Mies Gizmo. Sir Dudley Diggs has won the Queen's Plate. Mies Gizmo second.
The 159th running of the Queen's Plate, Saturday, June 30th at Woodbine. For more, go to woodbineentertainment.com.
Welcome back to our Knights at the Round Table.
Welcome back to Night School. Jeremy Plonk, joined by Bob Neumeier, Caton Bredar, Brian W. Spencer for this segment as we continue to take your topics in Night School and we kick them around the round table and discuss amongst ourselves. Bad weather. It's been something plaguing the U.S. During the course of this winter that has crept into spring. And how do you adjust for bad weather in your handicapping? Even in Southern California, the beginning of the year can be a wet season. A lot of off-the-turf situations, a lot of wet track situations. Neumeier, let's start with you. You see the forecast, things are bad. What happens?
Okay, this is an example of something that actually happened to me a few days ago. I was scheduled to drive down to Mohegan Sun in Connecticut to be in a handicapping tournament. And I looked at the long-range forecast, and it was fairly dire at Keeneland, possible mud at Aqueduct, definite mud at Oaklawn, so I canceled the trip. And the reason I canceled the trip is very simple. I think the game is hard enough when it's fast and when it's firm, and anything short of that, I'm not interested. So on muddy days, sloppy days, heavy days, yielding days, I'm reading a book. I'm not playing the races.
Good thing you're not eating fries.
Now I'm doing that too.
Kate, what about you when it turns bad?
Well, it's a little bit of what Neumeier alluded to earlier about patience. And if you don't have the patience, or in Neumeier's case, if you're going to have to drive a long distance just to get someplace to find out that none of the races are the types you're going to play, then I definitely think that you do sit out. But if you have the patience and the wherewithal, or you're in a situation, say, sitting at home, cozily watching the signals as they come through and deciding whether you want to play or not, sometimes these days can be the best days because a number of people do bail when there's off conditions or unpredictability in the weather. A lot of people who play on margins or off of algorithms at the last minute, who are going through computer lines directly into the tote that are betting big amounts of money, will often sit out those unpredictable situations. So for a smaller bettor, it is an opportunity sometimes to get some value and to sneak in. But you have to watch to see if there are a ton of scratches so that we have a number of short-priced favorites. Then those races are races that I don't know that you necessarily dive in and you do pass. Hopefully you don't go crazy with the fries. But you do see some races stay together, as was the case at Keeneland on Saturday, for example, where you did have some huge fields. We had races that stayed on the grass, but the turf was softer. And in those races, I think you do adjust if there is data or past performances to support it. You see horses who definitely don't like certain types of conditions or horses who seem to excel in them. But at the same time, I've found that if you stick to your original handicapping, a lot of times you do pretty well. And my biggest thing is turf to dirt. If the odds don't change a lot, if a trainer has a horse in a turf race and it's moved to the main track, 9 times out of 10, they will only be running their horse if they really believe their horse is capable of being okay on the main track. So if I like that horse on the turf, I'm going to figure that the trainer wouldn't keep them in if they felt they had absolutely no shot because it's a dirt race. So I'm going to see what the odds are. And if that horse has some value, I'm going to go for it. Now, a lot of times with scratches, that negates it and there's no value. But I still, if you can hang around and hang in there, you might have some really good prices as a result.
One thing people need to keep in mind, and a lot of people don't know this, is you can't really train on the turf at nearly every racetrack in America. You need to get a card to go on the turf to train. Usually it's just stakes horses for workouts on the turf. They don't gallop and go out every morning on the turf course. They go out to the main track. So these trainers know whether their horses can handle the dirt or not. They train on it 99% of the time. They know which ones can get over it, which ones can't. So like Caton said, if they're going to keep a turf horse in an off-the-turf situation to the dirt, they probably already know how their horse will handle that kind of situation. Brian, you've worked at tracks that had turf, poly track, turf and dirt, situations where the weather changes. How does it impact you?
I think I fall kind of somewhere in the middle of Neumeier and Caton here because, I will it's very easy for me to sit out a race when the track is kind of muddy or when it's maybe drying out. I find that there's a lot more unpredictability there. I would not in bad weather. I'm much less inclined to play races that are on the dirt, whether they were originally scheduled for the dirt or whether they were on the turf. But at least in my experience, and I have no clue if the data actually backs it up, but I'm a little bit less concerned with the footing on a turf course. There are obviously some horses for whom a yielding ground is definitely a no-go, but by and large, it seems to me that a greater majority of turf horses can kind of adapt to those conditions, whereas the track gets some moisture in it. Some horses can't stand up on it anymore, even when they were entered for dirt. So I think that's kind of a little bit of a thing. I will still watch turf races even if the course is soft or yielding, and just see if you can find some horses who maybe haven't tried it before. That's not an issue for me. But one of the things Caton brought up that I think is really overlooked, and this goes back to my time at Fairgrounds, is our Black Gold 5 wager, that jackpot wager, which was a pick 5, had to be the only winner to get it. You would think it was the big days with 12 horse turf fields, a bunch of those at the end of the card where you would get people to hit it. But the biggest joke and the biggest truth when I was down there is the best way to be the unique winner of the Black Gold 5, that jackpot wager, was to find a sleepy Thursday afternoon where it was raining, where it came off the turf, where nobody really wanted to play the card, and you'd get a 7 to 5 and a handful of 9 to 2s, and somebody would get 6 figures for it because a great majority of people, the sharp ones like Neumeier, are sitting out waiting for another day, while some smaller bettor, I would assume, has a better chance to make a big payout.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'm glad you were able to catch in on that, Brian, because I would be reading a book somewhere or watching a movie, believe me.
That's interesting, though, that when the big fish get out of the pool, the smaller bettor comes in with a little bit more of a puncher's chance, and it's an interesting way of looking at things. And this is a pari-mutuel sport. You are going against other players, and so if you feel that you're not playing with the same kind of arsenal as some of the big players, whether that be mentally or financially, maybe some of these days when they're not in the pool can be a day for you to take a little bit of a shot. Interesting thought process. I'm more of a spot player like Neumeier, and a couple bets a day is what I'm looking at, and during the course of a week. And so if there's a bad weather day, I can pass. I feel pretty good about passing. The one time, though, that it comes up and I can't avoid passing would be something like we saw Saturday. It's opening Saturday. It's Bluegrass Day at Keeneland. I'm geeked up. I've put all the time into the card, and it's bad weather. And when we get a big day of wagering, how do we approach these big days? That's our next topic that I want to talk about, because even if it rains, the sky's open. And how many years have we seen this at the Derby? Heaven forbid at the Preakness. We've seen typhoons hit at the Preakness in recent years, but we still want to play on the big days. How do we approach the big day at the races and those major events? Neumeier, let's go with you.
Well, you learn the hard way, and over the years, I've learned the hard way. And by learning the hard way means that I've blown too much money at the Derby, too much money at the Breeders' Cup when I don't need to. I kind of get lured into that, and I think a lot of people do. So what I've tried to do over the years is to look at racing from how did I do from January 1 of a year to December 31, and see if I won or lost or broke even. How did I do? I don't go by day to day. I certainly don't go by race to race. So no, I'm not going to spend, $1 zillion betting on the Breeders' Cup. There is one example of a race that happens once a year in the United States in which there are 20 entries involved, and that's the Kentucky Derby. Now, I might, depending on the situation. This year, probably not, because it looks like there's going to be a lot of favorites that look really good on paper, and I think they're going to run really well. But this provides an opportunity, because I'm not a big superfecta player or a big trifecta player, to be honest with you. But in the Derby is a different case, because it's a 20-horse entered field. So the payoffs are astronomical. They're difficult. They're almost impossible. But if you're right with that dollar super box or whatever, man, you get paid big time in that situation. So that might be just the one example of me taking a big day, one big race, and saying this is the only time on the 365 days of the year where there's a race with 20 in the race. So let me take advantage of that.
Yeah, you find that unique gem to polish there, because, the Breeders' Cup Distaff may be an 8-horse field with an 8-5 favorite. That looks like the 5th at Mahoning Valley next Thursday. I mean, there are 8-horse fields with 8-5 favorites all over the place. So when you're looking at it from a mathematical standpoint, from a gambler standpoint, a lot of these big days, much of the card can look just like any other race day when you strip the names and you strip the past performance of the horses down. So a good point there. Find what's different about this big day. What makes this big day such a good betting opportunity, and invest in that approach. Caton, the way you approach a big day.
Well, I think I'm in sync with Neumeier on that one, which is to say that I have tried to condition myself to not spend more money on big days than I do on other days, because I do find it a lot tougher, and I've usually been a lot less on target with races like the Kentucky Derby than I have with a lesser claiming race. So I don't want to put so many eggs in one basket. But that said, the opportunities are so great on those bigger days because of the sizes of the pools, and usually the sizes of the fields, not just in the Derby, but across the board. There may be some exceptions, but for example, at Keeneland on Saturday on Bluegrass Day, outside of the Bluegrass, one of the supporting races, a favorite, and it was a non-stakes race, the favorite paid over $10. You don't see that very often on a day-to-day basis. So you do need to take advantage of those types of races, because it is a whole lot more fun if you can bet a horse that is very logical and that is a favorite and get over $10 on it versus, the less than odds on type horses that we frequently see on a day-to-day basis. So I approach those. I look forward to big days. I like to play because the quality as well as the quantity is there, and the opportunities usually are better to get a horse with a good price. But I try not to spend more on them than I would normally spend on any race day. And again, I apply the same principles. And to take a page from Neumeier, I don't bet every race. Don't feel just because it's a big day, you have to get involved in every single race. There's still going to be races that you have stronger opinions on than others, and you have to use patience and discipline to pick them out. But it's a shame not to get involved on big days, because it's a lot of fun to watch those types of horses, and also to be able to have bragging rights if you do are fortunate enough to come up with the right answers for those bigger races. We still claim, I might have only picked one Derby winner in the last 15 years, but if I bet on them and cashed a good bet, those are the ones you talk about more than any other.
Yeah, the big race is fun. There's no question about it. It's hard to avoid that. It's hard to get pulled in. The one that cracks me up is like the 13th and the 14th. The two that are to help the parking lot clear out at the end of the night, and people are still firing at them trying to get even for the first 12 on the card. Remember,
Jeremy. Jeremy, let me interject because I think this is somewhat analogous, and that's not just big days, but every day, and that's what I call this the 5:30 p.m. panic. That's when you're down money after 9 races and there's one left. Mm-hmm. So instead of, there's nothing in there that entices you whatsoever, but yet you're going to go in two-fisted to either break even or go over the even plus if you're right. So you bet 1,000 more times in the last race than you would the second race because of this 5:30 p.m. panic. No. You're a loser, capital L, okay? Don't do it. Just keep the money in your pocket and wait for another day. Same thing to me, I think, with the big days, and that is if you see an opportunity, seize it. Okay, no problem. The 20-horse field in the Kentucky Derby is an example of what I'm talking about. But on a Breeders' Cup day and whatever day, man, I've lost a lot of money by being one of those suckers that said because it's a big day, I'm going to go crazy and lose a lot of money. I don't want to do that.
And I think Neumeier brings up a sort of a good point there. It's maybe a little counterintuitive for me, but I'm at my very most disciplined in wagering when there's even a little bit of bad weather on a big race day. I've always thought that as a player, I'm better on a Thursday than I am on a graded stakes day. But especially on those big days, if bad weather comes to kind of tie these two topics together, there's already on those big days enough things working against me with, the quality of horses, with the big money bettors in there that you're already trying to beat. If you introduce weather into it, that, 90% of the time just takes me out. Maybe a turf race here and there, but other than that, I'm more likely to sit on my hands on, say, a Preakness day if there's terrible weather than I am a Thursday at Fairgrounds.
And, a couple asides to some of the stuff that you guys brought up, like Neumeier's talking about that 5:30 fever, Remember, the 12th race today, the 11th race today is no different than the first race tomorrow, the first race next week when you play again on the following Saturday. Don't try to win the day. Like Neumeier said, it's kind of an annual thing for him. However you want to put your length of time in evaluating your success and failure, too many people are trying to win the day. And you chase that way, and you spend $40 trying to get the $200 back that you're down, and now you're down $240 on a race that you really shouldn't have spent $40 on. Quit trying to win the day. Look forward to winning the career if you can, and enjoy the process along the way for sure. Winning today is not going to make you feel that much better than starting out next Saturday with an additional $40 in your bankroll and coming at it with a fresh mind. There's a lot of things we can learn in our discussions here in Night School. We've done over 250 of these lessons over the years. And over the years, we've had some handicapping authors on. We had Mike Maloney last year talking about his new book, Betting with an Edge. Bob Neumeier is in the process of thinking about launching a handicapping publication of his own, looking at in the world of books and racing writing, and we wanted to talk a little bit about the benefit and some of the pitfalls of handicapping books. And so for our final segment on Night School tonight, we're going to talk along that approach. If there were any handicapping books that you've read amongst the panel or in the live chat that you want to share with people, certainly type those into the live chat. Give recommendations to each other. We can discuss the pros and cons. We're not here to sell anybody's particular book or pitch any particular idea, but the thought process of what can be learned from handicapping books and maybe what we stay away from a little bit when it comes to handicapping books. But first, let's give the floor to Neumeier on this one because he's got the mind is turning for him and in the process of putting together such an idea.
I've gone. I have an idea, and I've gone over a couple of hurdles and passed them nicely. But I still have to go over another 3 or 4 to make this happen. So I'm thinking about it, and I've got some pretty good ideas in my head. However, let me quote one of the great authors of our time, Laura Hillenbrand, who wrote arguably the best book about racing ever, and that was her story on Seabiscuit. And she had a very famous quote that said, a book about horse racing is a death knell. And what she means by that, I guess, is that people across the board, now we're in the industry, we like the game, we love the game, we want to read about it, but does John Q. average American want to read about it? Well, maybe yes, maybe no. That's a vexing question. Personally, I think Picking Winners, written by Andrew Beyer, was a Bible to me when I was growing up, and still is. And I think it's the best handicapping book about part-times and, sitting around drinking a shot of Jack Daniels with a pencil and a number 2, a yellow piece of paper. I think it's all great. My book doesn't go that way. My idea, anyway, is to not do a book on handicapping per se, but as part of it, on betting, on stories that I've had winning, stories that I've had losing, the heartbreak, the thrill of the big pick six, some of my experiences doing television that are kind of funny, and whatever. But anyway, I think anything that we can absorb, anything that we can at least look at and think about that maybe we should do is a worthy experience. I don't care who's writing it, but for me, I would say my top 2 would be Picking Winners by Andy Beyer and Seabiscuit by Laura Hillenbrand.
I think in a handicapping book, what I would be looking for is those shared experiences. And that's kind of what we try to do with Night School. It's not as much apply this 1, 2, 3, 4. If you're looking for a workbook, like, how to assemble a clock, I just think it's a different kind of pursuit, handicapping the races. So sharing stories and learning in kind of, being able to sit on the shoulder of somebody and behind them and observe what they've done over the years, I think can be an effective way of learning. One of the main, I think, hurdles with a handicapping book is for it to remain relevant. So many of the publications that have been written from the 70s and earlier, you go back to the Ainsley's Guide. I mean, I got a copy of the Ainsley's Guide from an antique store as a gift from my wife one year for the holidays, and you go back and you read it, and 80% of it doesn't apply anymore. I mean, it's just, and it was a great book at the time, and not to knock it whatsoever, because it was the precursor to many of these other books. But as we talked earlier, layoffs aren't what they were 10 years ago. Medications aren't what they were 10 years ago. The way we play and the way races are written, conditions of races aren't the same as they were 10 years ago. So I think staying new in applying techniques is very difficult to do for a book. So for me, it's about experiences and what we can learn from each other. What about you, Caton?
Oh, I agree. And I think you can gain something from the handicapping books as well as the non-handicapping books. And with Neumeier mentioning Seabiscuit, I think to see everything, to learn and hear everything that went into that whole story and the story of Seabiscuit can help and even the most hardened handicappers and horse players learn something going forward. Kind of the story of what went into a horse and what happened with him, and even what happened with the rivals that he ran against is not just a great story, which it is, but it's also a lesson. And but there's a host of, the one thing about it, I think there are fewer great handicapping books out there now than we've had in the past. So I hope that you do get that book, Neumeier, because I would welcome the opportunity to read it and to learn from it. I think you learn from everything you read, but especially from some of your experiences and your stories, I know that there would be a lot to take in. I think of Steve Christ and his books, and as kind of maybe some of the first that I read that tied handicapping to kind of a story, his story of wagering, and always felt that they were, kind of almost primers that for anybody who is getting into the sport, especially from a player's perspective, should read. Jeremy, you mentioned Jim Quinn's books, and I think that they're without a doubt sort of the reference that people could go to for learning about pace and getting an idea about how to approach a race from that standpoint. And for people who are just getting involved in the sport, I think that those lessons are extremely important. But, you can even go back to my grandfather co-wrote a book when he retired from racing. So this was printed and it's out of print now, but you can find it occasionally on, eBay or at some used bookstores. And it was called All the Way, and it was his story. But it's a great kind of resource for some of the basics of thoroughbred horse racing at a very different time. It's interesting to see what's changed and what's remained the same. And I thought, especially at the time, that was a great primer for anyone who was a fan of racing or interested in playing the game. And that's kind of how it was billed and marketed. But even all these years later, I've had a couple people that discovered it for the first time who told me how much they enjoyed it and just got a feel for some basic principles that are still applicable today. So, I think that there are a lot of books out there that people don't even realize. And I'm actually a part of a judging panel every year for the Castleton Lions Book Award. So this will be my little shameless plug to throw in there. But we're coming up in about a week of announcing the winner of that at Castleton Lions. But it's one of the bigger prizes in all of literature, believe it or not. It's a $10,000 prize to the winning author for a book about horse racing. And it can be any genre. It could be handicapping. It could be fiction. It can be nonfiction. But we rarely get any handicapping books submitted. We get a lot of nonfiction. This year, our 3 finalists were all works of fiction, but all great reads. So for anybody who's a fan of horse racing, they might want to check them out as well.
Boy, I wasn't interested, but then you had me at 10,000. I don't know. I'm going to have to get my keyboard out now. What about you, Spence?
Well, I think a couple things from listening to Neumeier and Caton talk about this is kind of a twofold approach for me. One is that I think that books can still be useful, but I think that a lot of the information that some of the people that I'd want to hear from, I mean, to be honest, these days people are giving that information out for free, whether it's in, as a series of tweets over a course of a year or two, stuff that might normally be packaged into a book in years past is now being dispensed through a lot of different channels. And I think that that's made I definitely don't want to say that I think they're obsolete, but I think that that's made the market more difficult for, a really good racing book. And for me, it really comes down to, especially if we're talking about a handicapping book, for me, I mostly care about who wrote it, because if I trust the person who's writing it and I trust the way they approach racing and the way they attack wagering and kind of their general approach, then I'm going to be more interested in their book. And I'm not going to name names, but probably the audio version of subtweeting somebody. I got a book when I was working at the track a handful of years ago, and kind of duty bound, I kind of felt like I should read it. And I started reading it, and it was not good. And I kept reading it in hopes that it would keep getting better. And it was no joke. It was just not useful for a new player or an experienced player. And so that was one of those where, it's difficult, I think, to find that right balance of what you're trying to do, because, I mean, that's the kind of book where you couldn't pay me to recommend it to somebody, whether they were new or experienced. So trusting the writer and trusting the way somebody approaches the game, for me, is paramount in whether I'm going to read somebody's opinion and whether, in the case of a book, I'm going to be interested in reading a book about it.
Yeah, that's kind of like I was talking. You want to kind of, lean over somebody's shoulder or sit behind them and kind of spend a day with them at the track and a lifetime with them at the track to share that experience. We're going to pull up here into a commercial break. When we come back, more on Night School. We're going to dismiss the panel for the night. Spence up next.
We'll be right back with more Night School.
I've never experienced anything like it. I thought to myself, this could be today. Why not today? And it was. The horse went from last to first and won by a nose. Winning the NHC changed my life. It never would have happened without TwinSpires.com. I won a TwinSpires qualifying tournament and went on to take the $1 million prize. Play at TwinSpires.com and you could be the next one to hit it big.
Some folks like to bet on the horses. Some like to bet on the games. Some folks like to bet on their phone, and some like to bet from their suite. So what's your best bet? All of the above. No matter how you like to bet, Remington Park is your best bet yet. With world-class horse racing, OKC's newest casino, and online suite booking now available. Remington Park, it's your best bet yet.
Do you want unlimited access to handicapping without exorbitant prices? Then Brisnet.com has you covered with a variety of plans for past performances, pedigree, and raw data. The Brisnet.com Performance Plan offers unlimited PDF past performances for just $75 per month and is available at Brisnet.com/PP. American Produce Records Online puts the pedigrees of nearly 1 million dams and more than 2 million foals at your fingertips, plus sire stats for only $275 per year, and is available at Brisnet.com/APR. The Brisnet.com data plan offers unlimited access to race day data files, perfect for handicappers with their own database or to plug into other people's programs. The data plan is just $125 per month. Visit Brisnet.com for all this information and more, and discover why Brisnet.com is the handicapper's edge.
Welcome back to our Knights at the Round Table.
Welcome back to Night School. Happy to be joined by Steve Byk. And Steve, we've kind of run the gamut on tonight's episode as far as looking at boutique meets like Keeneland, whether horses are maybe a little bit more cranked off of the layoff when they're pointing to meets like Keeneland. What if you had to pick out sort of that one thing that changes when you're handicapping a meet like Keeneland or the beginning of a meet like Saratoga, as opposed to the ins and outs of just let's say a regular meet at another track? What is kind of that one thing you would sort of nudge players towards thinking about a little differently at a place like Keeneland with that short meet as opposed to some other tracks?
You'd have to say that trainer intent is probably your key angle. And because meets like Keeneland and Saratoga have a very set and familiar condition book, trainers well in advance of the meet are keeping an eye on their stock and knowing what races are going to show up where, how quickly. For Keeneland, it's the 3 weekends. At Saratoga, it might be in the first book or the second book. And because of that, and also because, of course, of owner interests and the owner desire, there's a certain harmony and regularity. At Saratoga, George Weaver, it's amazing how every single year George will send out 7 or 8 winners at good prices, sometimes outlandish prices. At Keeneland, virtually the entire Watts Humphrey stable, whether it's Vicky Oliver and Phil Oliver, or whether it's Rusty Arnold, and of course Rusty Arnold further with Ashbrook and really with all of his clients collectively. I mean, they both, those are two outfits and groups of owners that are notorious, and you can kind of count on. And even if the horses don't necessarily look formful, they invariably outperform their odds.
And Caton brought up Vicky Oliver's barn earlier on in tonight's show, and I think that's kind of one of those really good ones to grab onto, because those horses are almost always overlaid on the board. Now, for somebody who's maybe getting newer to the game, is there a way? And maybe the answer is no, but is there a way to kind of sniff out those horses on paper, or do you just need to have kind of the stats in your back pocket to know who are the names you're looking for and who are the exact type of horses? Is there an easier way to find it without having to do all that research if you're newer to betting Keeneland?
Well, you still should be doing the research. You should be utilizing historic charts. For free, you can go a number of places and pull up, the last 3, 4, 5 seasons. And since it's only 16 days, you can generally, work through. You could even print them all out and have your own little notebook, and you'll see it right away. You'll see the specific horsemen and the jockey trainer combinations, and whether you develop your own set of angles or whether you use a stats race lens and pull out the stats out of that. If you use a product like the products from Progressive Handicapping, the Saratoga handicapper, the Keeneland stat book, those kinds of handicapping tools are really valuable and always worth the fairly nominal expense, to buy them. It'll take all of one score to offset the investment on those kinds of statistical reference resources. But there's no instant answer without work. I mean, you've got to do some of your own work to understand what you're looking at, and it won't take long. It'll take maybe one season if you're new to it. And the first time you've looked at Keeneland this last week and upcoming, you'll see right away. You don't have to be the most savvy or accomplished player to catch on to the regular themes that seem to repeat themselves, whether it's spring, fall, or both.
And I think that you brought up something that is that's really key, is that it is only 16 days, so maybe the barrier to entry there to getting that research under your belt not quite as high as it would be with some of the longer meets where you're trying to get those long-term stats. As you mentioned, you can look over all 16 days in at least a comparably short time. So a nice little compliment there to kind of end our discussion on today's show about Keeneland, about these boutique meets. Steve, thanks so much for taking some time to be with us, and enjoy your travels to Arkansas and enjoy the Arkansas Derby this week, and we'll talk to you again next month.
Absolutely, Brian. Thanks a lot.
All right, thanks, Steve. We'll be right back. Jeremy Plonk's got a spot here with Jim Goodman from Keeneland right on after the break.
And we'll be right back with more Night School.
Next on FAQ 60, money management. Money management remains one of the more elusive jewels in the handicapping crown, but it doesn't have to be if you focus on a few key points. First, handicap the races ahead of time so you can spend your time at the track crafting your tickets while watching the odds and will pay screens. Make your biggest bets only when you feel you have the edge. A strong opinion or an overlay potential payoff are examples. Earmark a large percentage of your daily betting handle to only those races where you feel an edge, and nickel and dime other races on the card or skip them completely. Not every race deserves the same investment. And be honest with yourself about your strengths and weaknesses. This FAQ 60 is brought to you by AQHA Racing and Horse Player Now. For more, go to AQHARacing.com.
Catch the buzz. Horse Player Now's popular handicapping tool returns and puts our handicappers to work for you in a new and improved format in 2018. Team grid picks, feature race analysis, Bob Neumeier's stats and sheets plays, consensus team gimmicks captained by Caton Bredar, and analysis of 6 major tracks in each issue provided by the Horse Player Now team. Purchase individual editions or subscribe for the remainder of 2018 and save over 60%. Our eyes, your prize. To learn more about the buzz, view sample reports, and subscribe, visit horseplayernow.com.
Strategize, analyze, select. Join Keeneland Select to bet on racing from around the world on your computer, tablet, or smartphone, anytime, anywhere. Featuring the best rewards in racing, free pass performances, live video, race replays, and more. Plus, Keeneland Select invests a portion of its profits back into the sport. Join Keeneland Select today and earn a $150 sign-up bonus at KeenelandSelect.com. Dedicated to the sport and dedicated to the players.
Welcome back to our Knights at the Roundtable.
Welcome back to Night School. Jeremy Plonk, joined now by our special guest for this April edition of Night School, Jim Goodman, simulcast director and director of mutuals at Keeneland. Jim, welcome in.
Hey, Jeremy. Good to be with you.
We want to talk some general handicapping and betting strategies with you. You're a hardened horse player, a contest circuit player who's had some success. Tell us about your approach to betting the races and handicapping in general.
You must have been talking to my wife. She uses the word hardened horse player a lot when I'm talking about my betting patterns. I've been around a long time. I've only been working at Keeneland 12 or 13 years, but I was obviously, when I interviewed for this job, they asked me what my qualifications were, and I said I've placed every kind of bet you can possibly place. So on the other end of it, I think I do okay. So, horse player, I'm a contest player. I love contests, and I've been lucky enough to qualify for the NHC the last 5 years in a row. So I know that my strengths are identifying horses that are likely to get in the money that are 5 or 6 to 1. Unfortunately, some days I get really brave and I try to hit tries and supers. Love pick fours, and I love to get value in pick fours. I think pick 4 and pick 5 pools are the best wagers that we offer today. So what I try to do when I look at a horse race is try to not necessarily beat the favorite, but try to find value and go back not necessarily just to the last race, but maybe to another race similar in that horse's past, that the conditions are the same, or the trainer has followed the same pattern, or that things have clicked in a way where I think this horse has a chance to make a big improvement. And I think that's what a lot of horse players look for, but I think a lot of horse players only focus on current form. I try to look at the possibility that a horse could improve over a new track, over a new surface, over a change that a trainer has made. And I try to apply those principles to my handicapping every day. But I also like to play pick 4s and pick 5s, trying to find, I don't mind taking, for example, the pick 4 and pick 5 on Saturday at Keeneland. Obviously, Good Magic ran well, and Monomoy Girl was an obvious single, so you're not going to get value inside those races. But there was value to be had in the pick 5 that day. The Lucas horse won the first race, the Commonwealth with Warriors Club, and the pick 5 went up paying $5,800 with actually 2 obvious singles and another horse that was 4 to 1, the horse that won the Madison. So I think I look for value. I look for trouble lines in horses. I look for things that trainers are trying to do that they have been successful with in the past.
We talk a lot about value as experienced horse players, but for an inexperienced horse player, how do they determine value? I mean, do you set a line for each horse in your mind that says, this horse looks to me to be about an 8 to 1 shot, so value means it's higher than 8 to 1, or are you going to recommend that a newer player just kind of use the morning line as a baseline for what they determine value to be? How would you kind of set that bar in determining value?
I think with a new player, I think it's a very dangerous thing to only use the morning line. I was talking to a player the other day, and he was complaining that he didn't have much success here because the morning lines are, he says, I look at that and I try to place wagers based on that and the jockey. I said, you got to dig deeper than that. You got to understand that, for example, at Keeneland, Mike Battaglia sets the morning line. He's trying to guess what the bettors are going to do, not necessarily what horses he likes. But it's only one man's opinion. Mike's an outstanding horseman. He's been sitting the line here for a long time, and he's amazingly accurate. But it's also something that when you as a horse player look at a race, you need to figure out in your mind, is that 3 to 1 shot really worth 3 to 1? Maybe in your mind, he's 8 to 5, and a 3 to 1 price is a good price on it. But I think you need to go deeper than just depending on the morning line. And I do set a value line. If I look at a horse in the morning, best thing I can do as a horse player is look at a daily racing form, early TPs without any morning line. And that way you don't have any preconceived notions about which horse is going to be favored by that person who's making the morning line. You rather look at the race very open-mindedly and say, I think this horse is 3-1, or I think this horse is 5 or 6-1. Then you compare that when the race day comes.
And to do that, whether you use DRF, Briss, or any brand, if you download your past performances on the day of entry, say Wednesday for Saturday, they won't have that morning line in there. So that can be a good tool for you to kind of, like Jim said, go at it blindly and try to set your value line that way. Jim, a quick thought on Keeneland. We've got it in the spring. We've got it in the fall. It's a short boutique meet. Any tips for playing Keeneland you want to pass along to the audience?
Yeah, one of the things that I thought about when you first called me about being on the program is that my handicapping for Keeneland in the spring is completely different than the fall. And the reason is that so many horses come here off extended layoffs. You have to look at the trainers' patterns. You have to look at, for example, the best examples on opening weekend were Chad Brown. Chad Brown has great horses, so you always need to throw his horses in, but they were ready to run at Keeneland, even though they may not have had a prep race. It's hard to get a prep race for an April meet, and so they may have been off for a few months, but if you look at the patterns that Chad has done in the past, he brings horses ready to run and he places them in the right spot. Same thing with Wesley Ward. His 2-year-olds have not quite performed as well as they have in past springs, but he had a couple of older horses that were ready to run that he's been training up at Turfway. I think the April meet is something that you have to kind of throw out the mindset that I need this horse to be in great form, because sometimes the horses won't be in great form because they've been off. In October, on the other hand, you've got a complete season, and horses are coming from other tracks shipping in good form or rounding into good form. And I think it's a very different handicapping process. Spring is very difficult because you've got horses coming from all over the country. You have to look at patterns like Gulfstream horses shipping up here running on the turf, obviously have run in the wintertime and are fit, maybe versus a horse that's coming out of the east that hasn't run on the turf. You look at horses coming out of fairgrounds that have run in the wintertime. So those are angles you can use in the spring, but it's a very difficult handicapping proposition. That's why our payoffs are usually so good in the spring.
Our thanks to Jim Goodman from Keeneland for joining us, and that's going to wrap up our edition of Night School for the month of April. Thanks to the round table and everybody who took part tonight in the live chat. Be sure to join us for the next edition of Night School, which will come up the second Tuesday of every month. In May, that means May the 8th, the Tuesday after the Kentucky Derby. Squeeze between the Derby and the Preakness. We'll see you then. Have a great night, everyone.